A metallic door explodes open beneath the Whitmore estate. Security boots thunder down forgotten stairs no guest has ever seen, no architect's blueprint publicly shows, no city inspector knows exists. Callista Whitmore stands paralyzed at the top of the stairwell, her entire body trembling. Her phone, usually an extension of her perfectly manicured hand, shakes so violently she nearly drops it. Her breath comes in short, panicked gasps. Behind her, Marielle Whitmore's scream pierces through the mansion's marble walls, a sound so primal it doesn't belong in a house this elegant, this pristine, this expensive. And at the bottom of those stairs, in front of that newly opened door, Richard Fallon Whitmore, billionaire real estate mogul, celebrated philanthropist, Mine City's most beloved public figure, crumbles to his knees. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. Also, let me tell you something funny. Someone actually bet that I can't reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of this year, and honestly, I want to prove them wrong. So if you're watching this right now and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and join the family. Reaching 1,000 subscribers is a very personal goal for me, and your support would mean the world to me. Thank you for believing in me and being part of this journey. And before you go, drop your name and location in the comments. I'd love to give you a special shout out in my next video introduction. His perfectly pressed tuxedo wrinkles. His $1 million watch catches the dim light. His face, usually composed in confident authority, twists into something unrecognizable. Terror. Pure, absolute terror. Because standing in the underground corridor, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light flooding in from the stairwell, is Delia Nyamai Carter. 14 years. 14 years buried alive beneath obscene wealth. Her skin is pale, not the healthy ivory of someone who simply avoids the sun, but the ghostly, translucent pallor of someone who has been stolen from sunlight. Her cheekbones are sharp, her frame thin from years of controlled deprivation. Her feet are bare against cold concrete. She wears a simple gray dress that hangs loose on her diminished frame. But her eyes, they are sharp, focused, burning with an intelligence that makes the security men instinctively step back. She isn't crying. She isn't begging. She isn't collapsing. She is standing. And her presence, her mere existence in this moment, shakes every person in that corridor to their core. Delia? Callista's voice breaks. Delia Carter? The name hangs in the air like a ghost finally given permission to speak. Above them, just above them, separated by floors and foundations and 14 years of lies, the Whitmore Mansion hosts its annual winter charity gala. 300 guests in designer gowns and tailored suits. Crystal champagne flutes. A string quartet playing Vivaldi. Camera flashes from society photographers capturing the Whitmore family's legendary generosity. Mayor Henderson just gave a speech praising Richard's unwavering commitment to social justice. The governor's wife toasted Marielle's compassionate heart. Callista's social media is flooded with comments calling her #goals and inspiring. Meanwhile, beneath the same roof those guests dance under, in a space carved from the mansion's original servant quarters and then deliberately hidden, forgotten, erased from all official records. A woman who was supposed to have vanished 14 years ago just walked back into the world. And she is not the girl they imprisoned. Delia's gaze moves slowly across the faces before her. She doesn't speak immediately. She doesn't need to. Her silence is more powerful than any scream. When she finally does speak, her voice is calm, measured, educated in a way that makes Richard's eyes widen with dawning horror. "Hello, Richard." 2 words. Just 2 words. But they land like an earthquake. The billionaire who built an empire on confidence, on control, on the ability to dominate any room he enters, cannot form a response. His mouth opens, closes, opens again. Nothing. One of the security men, Jackson, the head of personal security who's worked for the Whitmores for 8 years, steps forward hesitantly. Sir, do you know this woman? Do you know this woman? Callista almost laughs. A hysterical, broken sound catches in her throat. Of course he knows her. Everyone knew her. 14 years ago, Delia Nyamai Carter's disappearance was front-page news for weeks. The young black maid who worked for the Whitmore family. Beloved by the staff. Trusted. One day she simply vanished. Police searched. Media speculated. 1,000 theories, each more sensational than the last. Richard himself appeared on television, his face drawn with worry, his voice breaking as he offered a $50,000 reward for information. He donated $200,000 to organizations supporting missing black women. He became a spokesperson for the cause. The public loved him even more for it. Such compassion, they said. Such humanity, they praised. A true ally, they celebrated. And then, gradually, the story faded. New scandals emerged. Different headlines captured attention. Delia Nyamai Carter became another tragic statistic, another missing woman the system failed to protect. Except, she never left. How is this possible? Marielle's voice comes from the top of the stairs, barely a whisper. She's gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles have gone white. How is this possible? Callista's mind races. The discovery that led here happened only 20 minutes ago, 20 minutes that have shattered her entire understanding of reality. She'd been searching for old photo albums in the mansion's storage wing, something sentimental for tonight's gala presentation. The East Corridor, rarely used, filled with furniture nobody wanted but couldn't throw away. That's when she heard it. A sound. Faint. Almost imperceptible beneath the string quartet music filtering through the walls. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Desperate. She followed it to a section of wall that looked wrong. Different. The paneling didn't quite match. When she pressed against it, searching for the source of the sound, something shifted. A hidden catch released. A door that shouldn't exist, that no one ever mentioned, that wasn't on any floor plan she'd ever seen, cracked open. And from behind it, in the darkness, she heard breathing. Human breathing. The security team arrived within minutes. They forced the full door open, revealing stairs leading down into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, triggered by the breach. And now, here they stand. The Whitmore family. The woman they erased. And the truth that can no longer be hidden. I need everyone to listen very carefully, Delia says, her voice still eerily calm. She looks directly at Callista. 14 years ago, I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. Your father made a choice that night. He chose his reputation over my freedom. His empire over my humanity. His comfort over my existence. Richard finally finds his voice. Delia, please. I'm not finished. The sharpness in her tone silences him instantly. You told the world I disappeared. You cried on camera. You became a hero for my tragedy. While I was 10 feet beneath your charity galas, reading by flashlight, teaching myself law, documenting everything, surviving on whatever scraps of humanity Halias secretly brought me. Halias. Callista breathes. The name jolts another memory loose. Halia knew? Halia saved my life, Delia corrects. The only person in this house who refused to forget I existed. Above them, faintly, the sound of applause drifts down. Someone's giving another speech. Probably about the Whitmores' incredible contributions to social welfare. The irony is almost too perfect. Jackson moves his hand slowly toward his radio, but Delia notices immediately. I wouldn't, she says quietly. Not yet. Because right now, we're in a very delicate situation. You can call the authorities. You can try to control this narrative like Richard controls everything else. Or you can listen to what I have to say and understand that the next 24 hours will determine whether the Whitmore empire stands or falls completely. Are you threatening us? Marielle demands, finding her voice. Delia's expression doesn't change. I'm stating facts. Mrs. Whitmore, you've lived in luxury for 14 years while I lived in darkness below your feet. You knew. Maybe not everything, but you knew something was wrong. You chose silence because silence was comfortable. Marielle's face crumbles. She doesn't deny it. Richard struggles to his feet, trying to regain composure, trying to find the authoritative persona that usually commands respect. Delia, I can explain. Can you? Delia tilts her head slightly. Can you explain to Callisto why her childhood memories of me, the maid who saved her during that asthma attack, who taught her how to braid her hair, who listened when no one else would, can you explain why you told her I abandoned her? That I left without saying goodbye? Callista's legs feel weak. The memory rushes back. She was 13 when Delia disappeared. She cried for weeks. Felt betrayed, abandoned. Her father held her while she sobbed, assuring her that some people just weren't loyal, weren't trustworthy. He comforted her with lies while imprisoning the woman she loved. The helicopter's sound grows louder outside. Through the narrow window at the top of the stairwell, red and blue lights flash. Someone called the authorities. Delia notices but doesn't react with panic. Instead, something that might be satisfaction flickers across her face. The world is about to learn the truth, she says simply. About this mansion. About this family. About what wealth really buys when morality becomes negotiable. Richard's face goes through a transformation then. Fear melting into something raw, something vulnerable, something almost human. I'm sorry, he whispers. God help me, Delia, I'm sorry. Too late. 14 years too late. Footsteps echo above. Voices calling out. The gala has been interrupted. Guests are confused. Police are entering the main hall. And Delia Nyamai Carter, the maid they buried in silence, the woman they erased from existence, the life they thought worthless enough to discard, stands at the center of everything, calm and unbroken. We all have choices, she tells them. 14 years ago, you chose power over humanity. Tonight, the world gets to choose whether they believe in justice or just in appearances. The door at the top of the stairs bursts open. Police officers flood down, radios crackling. The nightmare Richard Fallon Whitmore tried to bury alive just became everyone's reality. But to understand how it reached this breaking point, how a respected billionaire could commit such monstrous acts, how a young woman could survive the unsurvivable, how an entire family could become complicit in erasing a human life, we must go back. Back to when Delia Nyamai Carter first arrived in Mind City. Back to when she was just a young woman with hope in her eyes and trust in her heart. Back to the beginning of a nightmare disguised as opportunity. Delia Nyamai Carter arrived at the Whitmore mansion on a crisp autumn morning with nothing but a borrowed suitcase and cautious optimism. She was 23 years old, fresh from community college, determined to save money for a psychology degree she'd been dreaming about since high school. The housekeeping position was supposed to be temporary, just a year, maybe two, until she could afford tuition. She never imagined it would become her prison. The Whitmore estate sprawled across 5 acres of manicured perfection in Mind City's most exclusive neighborhood. The main house alone was 12,000 square feet of marble, crystal, and carefully curated wealth. Walking through those iron gates for the first time, Delia felt simultaneously intimidated and grateful. This was opportunity. Security. A path forward. Richard Whitmore greeted her personally that first day, unusual for a man of his status, but he prided himself on being hands-on with his household. He was 42 then, handsome in that polished way wealthy men often are, with silver threading through his dark hair and a smile that reached his eyes. "Welcome to our home, Delia," he said warmly, shaking her hand with both of his. "We believe in treating our staff like family here." Family. The word would haunt her later. Marielle Whitmore was 38, beautiful and fragile in a way that suggested she'd been cracking for years. She smiled politely but distantly, her hands constantly fidgeting with her jewelry. Delia would later learn about the anxiety medication, the therapy sessions, the marriage that looked perfect in photographs but felt hollow in person. 13-year-old Callisto was all sharp edges and insecurity disguised as attitude. Designer clothes. The latest iPhone. Everything money could buy except the attention she actually craved. And then there was Halia, 56, warm-eyed, the senior housekeeper who'd worked for the Whitmores for 15 years. She took Delia under her wing immediately. "Keep your head down, work hard, don't ask questions about things that don't concern you," Halia advised quietly during Delia's first week. "This is a good position. Don't ruin it by being too curious." At the time, Delia thought it was just standard household politics. She had no idea it was a warning. The first 8 months were almost peaceful. Delia proved herself indispensable quickly. She was efficient, detail-oriented, and possessed an emotional intelligence that made her more than just hired help. She saw people, really saw them, in ways the wealthy often weren't accustomed to. When Callista struggled with a homework assignment, Delia sat with her patiently, explaining concepts in ways her expensive tutors couldn't. When Marielle had panic attacks in her room, Delia brought chamomile tea and listened without judgment. When Richard worked late into the night, stressed over business deals, Delia kept fresh coffee ready and the study pristine. "You're the best thing that's happened to this house in years," Richard told her once, late one evening. He'd had 2 glasses of scotch, enough to make him sentimental. "You actually care. That's rare in this world, Delia. Don't lose that." She smiled, honored by the compliment from a man she'd grown to respect. Trust built slowly, steadily. Too much trust, as it turned out. The incident that saved Callista's life happened 9 months into Delia's employment. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Callista had been playing tennis with friends in the estate's private court when she collapsed mid-serve. Asthmatic, severe, sudden, terrifying. Delia was closest. She ran to Callista, immediately recognizing the symptoms from a CPR course she'd taken years earlier. The girl's inhaler was in the house, too far away. Callista's lips were turning blue. Delia didn't panic. She called 911, positioned Callista correctly, talked her through controlled breathing techniques until the paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. Those 7 minutes saved Callista's life. Richard and Marielle arrived home to find their daughter in an ambulance, stable but shaken, and Delia riding with her to the hospital. "You saved her," Marielle sobbed, hugging Delia tightly in the hospital waiting room. "You saved my baby." Richard's eyes were wet. "Whatever you need, Delia. Anything. You're family now. True family." After that night, the invisible walls between employer and employee softened. Richard confided in Delia about business pressures. Marielle shared her struggles with depression. Callista started calling her D and texting her memes during school. Delia became the heart of the Whitmore household, the person everyone turned to, trusted, needed. Which made what happened next so much worse. Delia wasn't supposed to be in the East Wing that night. She'd been in the kitchen preparing tomorrow's breakfast ingredients, a task she usually finished earlier, but Marielle had requested a special dietary menu that required extra preparation. It was nearly midnight when she finally headed toward the staff quarters to sleep. That's when she heard voices. Raised voices, coming from Richard's private study, a room she cleaned every morning but never entered when he was working. She should have kept walking. Should have minded Halia's advice about curiosity. But one voice didn't belong. It was rough, threatening. And Richard sounded afraid. Delia hesitated outside the study door, which had been left slightly ajar. "Don't care about your excuses, Whitmore. We had a deal. Please just give me 2 more weeks. The shipment was delayed, but I can." 2 weeks? You think we operate on your schedule? Those workers are locked in those facilities now. You promised transport and documentation. You're making us look weak. Workers. Locked facilities. Transport. Delia's blood ran cold. "I know people are suffering," Richard's voice cracked. "But if we move too quickly, ICE will investigate, and then everything collapses. You'll lose your supply chain and I'll lose your precious reputation?" The other man laughed darkly. "That's what this is about? While 60 people are working 16-hour shifts in a warehouse you own, no running water, sleeping on concrete, you're worried about optics." Delia's hand flew to her mouth. She'd read about this. Labor trafficking. Modern slavery. Wealthy men exploiting undocumented workers, promising legal status and wages, then trapping them in debt bondage. Richard Whitmore, the philanthropist, the advocate, the man who gave speeches about social justice, was involved in this? I'll fix it, Richard promised desperately. Just don't. The study door suddenly swung open. Delia jumped back, but too late. Richard stood in the doorway, face flushed, eyes wild. Behind him, a man in an expensive suit but cruel eyes assessed her coldly. Delia. Richard's voice tried for casual and failed. What are you doing here? Her heart hammered. I was just walking to my room. I heard shouting. I wanted to make sure you were okay. The lie sounded hollow even to her own ears. Richard's jaw tightened. He glanced back at the other man, some silent communication passing between them. We need to talk, Richard said quietly. But not here. Not now. Go to your room. We'll discuss this in the morning. Delia nodded quickly and fled. But she didn't go to her room. She went to Halia's quarters, knocked frantically on the door. Something's wrong, Delia whispered when Halia answered, eyes still heavy with sleep. Something's really wrong with Richard. I heard, Halia, I think he's involved in something illegal. Human trafficking maybe, or… Stop. Halia's face went pale. She pulled Delia inside, shut the door firmly. Don't say another word. Not to me, not to anyone. But those people… Delia, listen to me. Halia gripped her shoulders, voice urgent. You cannot confront him. You cannot report this. Do you understand? Men like Richard Whitmore don't go down for crimes, witnesses do. I can't just ignore. Then leave. Tonight. Right now. Pack your things and disappear before he decides you're a liability. But Delia didn't leave. She thought about those workers. Trapped. Suffering. Invisible. Just like she was about to become. Richard came to her room at 2:37 a.m. She heard the lock click open. He had keys to everything, of course. Delia sat up in bed, pulling her blanket tight, fear coating her throat. I hoped you'd still be awake, Richard said softly, closing the door behind him. He looked exhausted. Broken almost. Delia, what you heard tonight. I won't say anything, she blurted. I swear, Mr. Whitmore. It's none of my business. I'll forget I heard anything. I wish I could believe that. He sat in the chair by her small desk, head in his hands. You're a good person, Delia. That's the problem. Good people can't live with injustice. I've watched you with Callista, with Marielle. You care about people. You have principles. I won't tell anyone, she repeated desperately. You will, eventually. Your conscience won't let you rest. You'll convince yourself it's the right thing to do. He looked up, and his eyes were cold now. And then my entire life, my reputation, my business, my family's legacy, all of it crumbles because you overheard a conversation you weren't supposed to hear. Mr. Whitmore, Richard, please? I can't let that happen. The way he said it made her stomach drop. Are you going to kill me? The question came out as a whisper. No. He actually looked offended. Gunno. I'm not a murderer, Delia. But I can't let you leave either. Can't let you talk to authorities, media, anyone. Then what? You're going to disappear, he said simply. Tomorrow, security will report you missing. We'll tell police you left suddenly, unexpectedly. Maybe a family emergency. Maybe you just quit without notice. People do that. Especially young people with no real ties to the area. You can't be serious. I've thought about this for hours. It's the only solution that protects both of us. You won't be harmed. You'll be taken care of. But you can't be visible anymore. The reality crashed over her. You're going to hide me. Imprison me. I'm going to protect what I've built, he corrected. And protect you from making a mistake that would destroy both our lives. This is insane. This is necessary. He stood, smoothing his jacket as though they'd just concluded a business meeting. Security will escort you shortly. Don't fight them. Don't scream. It won't change anything and it will only make this harder. Richard, please. But he was already at the door. For what it's worth, he said without looking back, I'm sorry it came to this. You really were the best thing to happen to this house. Then he left. 20 minutes later, 2 security guards appeared. Men she'd seen around the estate but never spoken to. They weren't cruel, just efficient. One carried zip ties. "Come quietly and this goes easy," the larger one said. Delia thought about screaming, thought about fighting. But Halia's words echoed, "Witnesses go down." She went quietly. They led her through corridors she'd never seen, downstairs she didn't know existed, into a space beneath the mansion that felt like stepping into a tomb. The underground quarters were larger than she expected. A small bedroom, a bathroom, a sitting area with a single barred window that revealed only concrete. Soundproof walls. A heavy door with electronic locks. A camera in the corner, blinking red. Richard appeared one last time, standing in the doorway while the guards waited in the hall. "You'll be comfortable," he said, voice hollow. "Food, books, basic necessities. This doesn't have to be cruel." "This is cruel." Delia's voice broke. "I saved your daughter's life." "I know." Something flickered across his face, guilt, maybe, or the ghost of humanity. "And I'll never forget that. But I can't let you ruin mine. Those workers you're exploiting, they have lives too. And they'll be handled eventually. Properly. Quietly. But not by you." He started to close the door. "Wait." Delia lunged forward, but he was faster. The door slammed shut. Locks engaged with mechanical precision. His voice filtered through a speaker she hadn't noticed. "I'm sorry, Delia. I truly am. But as of this moment..." A long pause. Then, with devastating finality, "You don't exist anymore." The speaker clicked off. Delia stood in the dim underground room, surrounded by concrete and cameras and the suffocating weight of erasure. Above her, the Whitmore mansion prepared for tomorrow. A mansion that would wake up missing a maid. A mansion that would mourn publicly while celebrating privately. A mansion that would bury her alive in silence. And no one would know the truth. Delia didn't cry immediately. Shock has a strange way of numbing the body, suspending emotion in a protective cocoon while the mind tries to process the impossible. She sat on the narrow bed in her underground prison, staring at the concrete walls, the single barred window that showed nothing but darkness, the camera blinking its eternal red eye. "You don't exist anymore." Richard's words echoed in the hollow chamber of her new reality. She touched her face, her arms, her racing heart, physical confirmation that she was still real, still alive, even if the world above would soon forget she'd ever been. The crying started on day 2. Time loses meaning in darkness. Delia tried to maintain routines, exercise, sleep schedules, mental puzzles, but depression crept in like water through cracks. Days blurred together. The meals that appeared through a slot in the door, plain, sufficient, delivered by unseen hands, marked time, but barely. She learned the dimensions of her cage through pacing. The bedroom was 12 feet by 10. The bathroom was functional but sterile. The sitting area contained a worn couch, a small table, 3 books that had been left behind, a cookbook, a romance novel, a Bible, and that damned blinking camera. No television. No phone. No window to the outside world. Just concrete, silence, and the weight of erasure. Some days she screamed until her throat bled, knowing the soundproof walls swallowed every desperate note. Other days she couldn't summon the energy to leave the bed. She watched dust motes dance in the air conditioning vent and wondered if this was how she'd die, not violently but slowly, disappearing from the inside out. "I saved his daughter's life," she thought over and over. "I saved her, and he buried me alive." Rage arrived like a wildfire, burning through the depression with violent clarity. Delia started exercising obsessively, push-ups, squats, running in place until sweat soaked through her clothes and her muscles screamed. The physical pain felt righteous, real, controllable in a way nothing else was. She imagined confronting Richard. Imagined her words sharp as knives, cutting through his excuses. Imagined the world learning what he'd done, watching his empire crumble, seeing him dragged away in handcuffs while she stood tall and vindicated. The fantasies sustained her through the worst nights. But rage, like depression, eventually exhausted itself. The first note appeared tucked inside a sandwich wrapper. Delia almost missed it, a tiny slip of paper, folded impossibly small. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "You are not forgotten. Stay strong. Halia." Delia clutched the note to her chest and wept, but these were different tears. Not despair. The notes continued sporadically. Never more than a few words, always hidden carefully. Sometimes tucked in the spine of a book. Sometimes wrapped around a pen. Once, impossibly, written on the inside of a toilet paper roll. "Keep breathing. You matter. I'm trying." Then, 3 months later, something extraordinary. A book appeared in her meal delivery. Not one of the 3 worn volumes she'd already memorized, but something new. The Count of Monte Cristo. Delia devoured it in 4 days. The message was clear. You can survive this. You can become stronger than what trapped you. More books followed. Psychology texts that Marielle had abandoned. Financial magazines Richard had discarded. Legal journals that had been destined for recycling. Halia was risking everything, her job, possibly her safety, to feed Delia's mind when her body was already being sustained. Then came the laptop. The laptop was ancient, a model from the early 2000s, slow and limited, but functional. No internet connection, the underground quarters had been built to be completely isolated, but it had been loaded with files before being smuggled down. PDFs of legal cases. Online course materials someone had downloaded. Ebooks. Software tutorials. Even some TED Talks that had been saved as video files. A note from Halia accompanied it. Battery lasts 4 hours. Charge port hidden behind loose tile in bathroom. Be careful. I love you. Delia built a routine around her treasure. She rationed the battery life carefully, studying during the precious powered hours, taking detailed handwritten notes during the dark times. She started with psychology, understanding trauma, resilience, the human mind under extreme stress. She was studying herself, really. Learning why she'd spiraled, how to rebuild, what kept people sane in imprisonment. Then finance. If Richard's empire was built on exploitation and fraud, she needed to understand how such empires functioned. She studied business structures, money laundering, offshore accounts, the paper trails wealthy criminals left behind when they thought themselves untouchable. Then law. Criminal law. Labor law. Human trafficking statutes. She memorized case precedents, studied successful prosecutions, learned the language of justice. And through it all, she documented everything. Every conversation she could remember from that night. Every detail about the man who'd visited Richard. Every inconsistency in the story Richard would have told police. She filled notebook after notebook, smuggled down by Halia, with meticulous records, creating a timeline, building a case. If I survive this, she wrote, he will not. While Delia transformed herself in darkness, the Whitmore family flourished in light. Richard's real estate empire expanded. He became a fixture at charity galas, a sought-after speaker on corporate responsibility. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so obscene. The $200,000 donation to missing black women's organizations? Tax-deductible. The televised interviews where he spoke about Delia with tears in his eyes? Career-boosting. He'd turned her disappearance into currency, social, political, financial. Marielle retreated further into herself. More medication. More therapy. More silent complicity. She knew. Maybe not everything, but something. And she chose willful ignorance because acknowledgement would cost too much. Callista grew up. 13 to 27. Teenager to adult. She graduated high school, attended an Ivy League university, paid for by her father's ethical business practices, got engaged to a lawyer from another wealthy Mine City family. She posted on Instagram about privilege and social justice, attended protests wearing designer clothes, called herself an ally, and never once wondered what really happened to Dee. It started small. Callista was home for Thanksgiving, rummaging through storage for old photo albums, when she found Delia's employee file in a box that shouldn't have been accessible to family members. The file was thin. Too thin. Just basics: name, address, emergency contact, a cousin in another state who'd never followed up on the missing person case. No exit interview. No forwarding address. No final paycheck documentation. Just nothing. For someone who'd supposedly quit suddenly, the paper trail was remarkably clean. Suspiciously clean. "Mom," Callista asked over dinner, "what actually happened to Delia? I mean, really?" Marielle's fork clattered against her plate. "She left, darling. You know this." "But why?" "She loved it here." "She loved," Callista's voice caught. "She loved me. She saved my life, and then just vanished without saying goodbye." "People are complicated," Richard interjected smoothly. "Perhaps she had reasons we couldn't understand." But his eyes held a warning. Callista noticed. Halia was dying. 71 years old, cancer spreading through her lungs, body failing despite treatments the Whitmores generously paid for, guilt money, perhaps, for her decades of loyal silence. She had maybe 6 months. Which meant Delia had maybe 6 months before her only lifeline disappeared forever. Halia made a decision. She started leaving diaries, her own journals from the years after Delia's disappearance, in places Callista would find them. Hidden in the library, tucked behind picture frames, slipped between mattress and box spring. Entries that read like confessions. "I know where she is. God forgive me, I know, and I do nothing but bring her scraps of hope. 14 years below us. 14 years of silence. How do I live with myself?" Callista asked about Delia today. She's starting to remember. Starting to question. Maybe she's the one who can finally end this nightmare. Callista found 3 diaries over 8 months. Read them in shocked silence. Couldn't reconcile the words with her reality. But the seed of suspicion, once planted, grew roots. She started noticing things. The way certain corridors were always locked. The way her father reacted when Delia's name came up. The way household staff exchanged meaningful glances when they thought no one was watching. The way Halia looked at her with desperate, pleading eyes. The discovery happened on a night when nature itself seemed to rage against injustice. Rain hammered the mansion's windows. Thunder shook the foundations. Lightning illuminated the estate in violent flashes. Callista couldn't sleep. She'd found a 4th diary that afternoon, Halia's final entry, written 2 days before she died. "The truth is in the East Wing. Below the forgotten corridor. Behind the wall that doesn't match. She's there. She's always been there. And I'm a coward for dying before setting her free." Callista had attended Halia's funeral that morning. Watched her father give a touching eulogy about loyalty and dedication. Watched her mother weep appropriately. Watched them pretend. At 11:47 p.m., she couldn't stand it anymore. She grabbed a flashlight and headed to the East Wing, the section of the mansion reserved for storage, rarely accessed, heavy with dust and secrets. That's when she heard it. Rhythmic. Desperate. Deliberate. The sound she'd heard briefly weeks ago and dismissed as old pipes. But now, with Halia's words echoing in her mind, it sounded like something else entirely. A signal. Heart-pounding, Callista followed the sound to a section of wall that looked wrong. The paneling didn't quite match. When she pressed against it, something shifted. A hidden catch released. The door, cracked open. "Oh my God," Callista whispered. She called security. Called her parents. Her hands shook so violently she could barely hold her phone. 10 minutes later, the metallic door slammed open fully. Security rushed down stairs that had been hidden for 14 years. Marielle screamed. Richard collapsed. And there, standing in the dim corridor, was Delia Nyamai Carter. Not the 23-year-old maid Callista remembered. A 37-year-old woman who'd survived the unsurvivable. Thin from years of limited rations. Pale from stolen sunlight. Barefoot because shoes were unnecessary in a tomb. But her eyes, intelligent, burning with a knowledge that terrified everyone in that corridor. She held a notebook. thick with years of documentation. Evidence. Hello, Callista, Delia said calmly, as though they'd simply been apart for a long weekend instead of 14 years. I've been waiting for you to find me. Her voice was different. Educated. Powerful. No longer the soft-spoken maid who'd once braided a young girl's hair. This was someone else entirely. Someone who'd died in darkness and been reborn as something stronger. Delia, Richard breathed from his position on his knees. Please. 14 years, Delia interrupted, her tone conversational. Almost pleasant. 14 years I've had to think about this moment. What I'd say. How I'd feel. Whether I'd still be human enough to show mercy. She looked directly at him. I am. But not the kind of mercy you're hoping for. Security radios crackled. Police were already on their way. Someone had called 911 when Callista first made the discovery. The mansion that had buried its secrets for 14 years was about to have them dragged into light. And the woman who wasn't supposed to exist anymore stood at the center of it all, holding the power to destroy everything the Whitmores had built on the foundation of her suffering. Thunder crashed overhead. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to break. The underground corridor felt smaller with so many people crowded into it. Security guards with radios crackling, Callista pressed against the wall in shock, Marielle's screams echoing off concrete, and Richard Fallon Whitmore on his knees like a king dethroned. But the space belonged to Delia now. She stood perfectly still, that thick notebook pressed against her chest like armor, her bare feet planted firmly on the cold floor. 14 years of captivity hadn't broken her posture. If anything, she stood straighter than anyone else in the corridor. Everyone needs to calm down, Richard said suddenly, his voice attempting authority even from his knees. He pushed himself up, brushing off his expensive slacks as though dignity could be restored through gesture alone. This is a misunderstanding that's gotten out of hand. A misunderstanding? Delia's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. Is that what we're calling kidnapping and false imprisonment now? Delia, please. He took a step toward her, hands raised in placation. If you'd just listen. I've been listening for 14 years, Richard. Her tone remained eerily calm. I listened to your footsteps above me. Your parties. Your speeches about justice and equality broadcast through walls that imprison me. I've done nothing but listen. Marielle's sobs had dissolved into hyperventilating gasps. One of the security guards, Jackson, the head of personal security, looked genuinely ill, his face gray with dawning comprehension of what he'd unknowingly been guarding all these years. Callista finally found her voice. Dee? Is it really you? Delia's expression softened slightly when she looked at the young woman. Hello, Callista. You've grown up. I can't. Callista's words tumbled over each other. How is this possible? Where have you been? 10 feet below your childhood bedroom, Delia answered simply. For 14 years. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Richard moved then, his desperation overriding calculation. He lunged forward, not violently, but with the frantic energy of a man watching his world collapse. Delia, listen to me. We can fix this. Quietly. I can compensate you, name your price. Anything. A house, money, complete financial security for life. We can make this right without destroying everything. Without destroying you mean? Without destroying my family. His voice cracked. Callista is innocent. Marielle is innocent. This doesn't have to become public. We can handle this privately, and everyone benefits. Delia tilted her head, studying him like a scientist observing a particularly fascinating specimen. You still think you have leverage. That's remarkable, really. Even now, you believe your wealth and influence can buy silence. I'm not, that's not what I'm. He switched tactics, his voice dropping to something that might have been genuine remorse. Delia, I made a terrible mistake. I was scared and stupid and I let fear turn me into a monster. But I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe that. What I believe, Delia said, opening her notebook, is what I've documented. Every day for 14 years. Every meal delivered. Every word spoken through that intercom. Every time you visited to ensure I was still contained. Richard's face went pale. You couldn't have, there's no way. Halia brought me notebooks. Pens. She documented dates, times, conversations she overheard. Delia's voice remained steady, but emotion flickered beneath it. The woman you employed for 30 years became my lifeline. She risked everything to help me survive. To help me prepare for this exact moment. Halia's dead, Richard said desperately, as though this mattered. Her evidence isn't. Delia turned a page in the notebook. March 17th, 14 years ago. The night you discovered I'd overheard your conversation about the trafficking operation. The warehouse you own on Porter Street, the one registered under a shell corporation called Whitmore Holdings LLC, where 60 undocumented workers were being held in debt bondage. Jackson's radio crackled with static. Voices reporting that police cars were pulling up to the mansion's front gates. You documented the trafficking? Jackson's voice was barely a whisper. Everything. Delia looked at the security chief, including the names of everyone involved. Your predecessor, Marcus Chin, was the one who coordinated transport. He retired 3 years ago to the Cayman Islands with a very generous severance package, didn't he, Richard? Richard's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. I studied law during my captivity, Delia continued, almost conversationally. I memorized statutes. False imprisonment carries 25 years. Human trafficking, 15 to 20 per victim. And that's just federal charges. Mine City has its own statutes for labor violations. How? Marielle's voice emerged broken and small. How did you survive down there? Delia looked at her former employer with something that might have been pity. You don't get to ask me that, Mrs. Whitmore. You who heard my screams in the early days and chose to turn up the music. You who knew something was wrong and chose your lifestyle over my life. Marielle crumpled against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor, arms wrapped around herself. Sirens were clearly audible now, growing louder. Red and blue lights flickered through the narrow window at the top of the stairwell. Delia, please, Richard tried again, but his voice had lost all its power. He sounded like what he was, a desperate man watching his empire crumble. I'll confess. I'll tell them everything. But please, give me a chance to do it on my terms. Let me protect Callista from... From what? Delia interrupted. From the truth about her father? From understanding what built her privileged life. She looked at Callista. I'm sorry you have to learn this way, but you deserve to know who you've been defending. Callista's face was streaked with tears. I'm so sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I should have looked harder. Should have questioned more. Should have. You were a child when this started, Delia said gently. You're not responsible for his choices. But I benefited from them. Callista's voice broke. Everything I have, everything I am, it's built on your suffering. The sound of boots on stairs echoed from above. Police officers were entering the underground corridor, their faces registering shock as they took in the scene. Delia Carter? One officer, a woman with sharp eyes and graying hair, stepped forward. I'm Detective Maria Santos. We received a 911 call about a woman found imprisoned in this residence. That's me. Delia handed over her notebook. I've documented 14 years of false imprisonment, human trafficking operations, and related crimes committed by Richard Whitmore. You'll find everything you need to begin investigation here. Detective Santos flipped through the pages, her expression growing darker with each entry. She looked up at Richard. Richard Fallon Whitmore, you need to come with us. This is insane, Richard tried one last time, but his voice held no conviction. My lawyers will. Your lawyers can meet you at the station, Detective Santos said flatly. She gestured to 2 uniformed officers. Take him. As the officers moved to Richard, he turned back to Delia one final time. And something in him finally, truly broke. Tears streamed down his face, not the performed tears of his televised pleas 14 years ago, but something raw and real and devastating. I'm sorry, he whispered. Delia, I'm so sorry. You saved my daughter's life, and God help me, I destroyed yours. You tried to, Delia corrected quietly. But while you were building your empire on lies, I was building something you never expected. I became educated, resilient, powerful. The maid you buried alive rose higher than you ever stood. Richard sobbed openly then, the sound of a man finally comprehending the magnitude of his sins. Not because he faced prison, though he did. Not because his reputation was destroyed, though it was. But because he finally understood, he hadn't just hidden a maid. He'd hidden brilliance, strength, destiny itself. And it had emerged more powerful than anything his wealth could ever build. The officers led him away, his expensive shoes scraping against concrete as he stumbled up the stairs. Marielle followed in silence, escorted by another officer, her face blank with shock and guilt. Callista remained, standing uncertainly in the corridor. Delia, I don't know what to say. Say you'll testify, Delia replied. Say you'll tell the truth. That's all I need. I will. I swear I will. Callista moved forward hesitantly, arms half extended as though wanting to hug but uncertain if she had the right. Delia made the decision for her, pulling the young woman into an embrace. They stood there in the underground prison, the survivor and the daughter of her captor, while police radios crackled and evidence was photographed and justice, finally, began its slow and painful work. The trial lasted 8 months. Richard Whitmore was convicted on multiple counts: false imprisonment, kidnapping, human trafficking, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Sentenced to 45 years without possibility of parole. Marielle received immunity in exchange for testimony, but her social world disintegrated. She moved to another state, seeking anonymity and therapy. Callista became an advocate for trafficking victims and wrongfully imprisoned individuals. She donated her entire trust fund to organizations supporting survivors. Some people called it performative. Others called it penance. Callista called it, the least I can do. Delia spent her first year of freedom simply learning to exist again. Therapy. Sunlight. The overwhelming sensation of choice. She completed her psychology degree, then law school. She became a voice for the voiceless, using her story not as tragedy, but as testament. Because here is what she proved. Wealth cannot silence truth forever. Power cannot bury courage indefinitely. The human spirit, when determined to survive, becomes unbreakable. Richard Whitmore tried to erase a woman he deemed worthless. Instead, he created his own reckoning. The maid he buried alive became the force that brought him down. And in the end, the forgotten life mattered more than the empire built on forgetting. Some people rise because the world lifts them. Others rise because they refuse to stay buried. Delia Nyamai Carter chose to rise. And nothing, not wealth, not power, not 14 years of darkness, could keep her down. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.